Hey, what's up, Instagram? We are doing our weekly interviews with Doctor.Benergy, Dr. Morrell, either way is fine, and some very notable people. We're gonna hop on with this. Angela Leong. I hope everybody's been having a good day. It's been eventful here at Lit Enterprises and pretty fun. I don't know if anybody caught these last couple interviews I had with. There she is.
Hi.
Hey, hello, Angela. How's it going?
Turn this notification off. How's your day so far?
I'm actually shining today. Yesterday was absolute trash, so I'm pretty sure that it's simply just a bounce back.
Uh,
Today, yeah. How about you?
yeah, I'm just in the middle of the day. I'm
Good.
schools,
Yeah,
schools.
so I'll let you introduce yourself. I'm not sure how you like to come in formally, so I'm not gonna do that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm a registered counselor. I work out of Vancouver, BC, beautiful British Columbia, and Canada. I understand you're in. Are you in North Carolina right now?
I was there. I'm traveling now, but for the moment, I am in Oklahoma City, so I'm smack in the middle.
Oklahoma, in the Central America, right?
Yeah, I'm like we're like the hat that's on top of Texas.
Ah, yeah. So for everybody that's joining in right now, that can I call you Ben?
You can't say Benjamin.
Benjamin. Yeah, we haven't connected in a couple months now, but we had just a discussion.
Absolutely. That's why I was looking forward so much to talking so much more, especially on therapy, trauma, and psychedelics are huge right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sounds like.
I just got so great. And I wish we had recorded that one because I really felt your soul, man.
Mm, I appreciate that. Same to you. That's why we're back.
Yeah, I know, right? I really felt your heart. And I told my friends about you. I'm like, this guy is really something. He's really unique. Yeah. I
Wow.
really someone who has really carried the heartbrokenness of the world in such a beautiful and graceful way.
Mm. Yeah, well, my mom, thank God for my mom, but she told me because, I started talking to her about all the, prior traumas and some of the mental health stuff. And she told me, she was like, Benjamin, these are your gifts. Like, you're a doctor. She's like, if you fix these things, you can then fix anyone else that you come across. And, so I swear that pretty much everybody you meet is going to have some trauma, some level of anxiety or addiction. And, I think I worked through all three of those pretty, closely. So it really helps me connect with folks. And I know that
Mhm.
was the same case for you too. And one of the reasons I appreciate talking to you was, first of all, the message you're putting out, the attitude that you have with it is just so admirable that I gotta have, I gotta be on your team. you know.
You, I mean, like I see your content, and I see it's very integrated. It's
Mm.
there's no piece missing, right? The physical, the spiritual, the emotional, the psychological. And that's actually I find that's hard to come by. It's like I find that there's people are very siloed into their areas, right? Either it's physical health or
Mm.
mental health, right? You kind of have to combine all the things.
Well, yeah, this is something that you know all about, but trauma, for the people out there, trauma changes your body, your brain, your genetics, your psychology. It's all of it. And
Mhm.
the one thing that shifted my understanding of, the mind, body, soul was really understanding trauma. Was it changes the whole thing. So treating one thing is actually treating the other thing. And for instance, like working with the body actually helped me get through a lot of my issues with trauma and recognizing that your heart rate shouldn't jump like 20 points when somebody opens the door. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Little things like that, and you can really gauge them and work with them. So really opened my eyes to that. So I try to remind people that it's all the same. And I definitely found myself being siloed out and not being able to connect with people like you do. So
Right. So it sounds like you used to have a startle reflex. Is that right? It's kind of blurry. Sorry, I just.
you're fine. Yeah. So I would say one of my specialties is identifying and working with trauma, specifically because I just been there, you know. You can spot it from a distance. You know, people have their traps and their shoulders up at their ears and, you know, sitting in the corner of the room, have to face the door. These are all things that I just thought were normal. Until I started working at the VA with veterans and hearing their stories. And I was like, wow, I didn't go to war. But you know, some of these things sound really familiar.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So I mean, I just did a PTSD assessment too. I mean, like these tools are kind of sometimes are helpful, but like it's also super frustrating because um, it'll ask you like, have you experienced like someone killed in front of you? Someone? Have you been in a war? Have you been in a natural disaster?
Mm-hmm.
What these fail to recognize is sometimes more like they accumulate like more like moderate to minor stressors are also can PTSD symptoms like
Mm-hmm.
flex, right? Like the hypervigilance, right?
Mm-hmm.
Bad dreams, sleeplessness, and that sort of thing. So I really appreciate that you really have to go to war or
Mm-hmm.
see in front of you for you to have trauma
Right.
and trauma symptoms, right? Like, yeah, like, and I think that word trauma gets thrown around quite loosely. Like, what do we mean by trauma? Like, when we're talking about trauma, we're actually meaning, like, technically, according to DSM, like, we're startle reflex, hypervigilance, like, um, nightmares, flashback, sort of this like negative worldview sort of thing, right? Um,
Yeah. One of the, just to get at that, was one of the um, things is also you have to have some kind of major stressor, which was something I disagreed
yeah,
with. Like,
exactly. Yeah.
yeah, because I mean, you don't have, because
Yeah.
Dr. Mate says this. I know you're a fan of him.
Yeah.
For those of y'all who don't know, he's like one of the world's foremost leaders on trauma and addiction. But
And
he says, yeah. So trauma isn't necessarily what happens to you; it's what happens inside of you. It's one of his quotes that I took to heart because I was an extremely I was a sensitive person in a very insensitive environment, and things that, you know, these hardened rednecks would not be traumatized by. That's just like part of their day to day. Like my dad, like things just don't faze him, you know. Whereas I was more like my kind of like my mother. You know, she taught me to always, you know, appreciate these little things and like seemingly tiny things. I was like, oh my god, like that is not okay. And those things accrue over time too.
right, right. So you have that balance of like really harsh, anything goes, like that hyper masculine dad, and then
Mm.
your that was like the gentle soul. So you had more of your mom's personality.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely have a middle ground, you know, because I can be my own pretty aggressive person. But yeah, I had a very traditional father and a traditional mother, which I'm very thankful for because it does create a very good balance. Um,
So I think the last time we talked, you mentioned that you're partially indigenous, is that right?
yeah, yeah. So this is
I,
something I wanted to actually talk to you about, is because, you know, you're very into the historical and generational trauma,
yeah,
which was something first of all, I
yeah.
thought it was ridiculous because this is back in the day. I was like, come on, like now you're inheriting your parents' problems, get out of here. Um, and then I started thinking about it, and then I read the research, and I was like, oh, this actually makes a lot of sense. Like I think one of the articles I had read where it's like essentially if you send a shockwave through this, you know, this colony of worms, that it creates an epigenetic shift that you can track literally 17 generations later. So
Wow.
one magnificent, you know, trauma literally shaped the entire course of that particular population's genetics. And I was like, I'm Native American, and I wondered why I was so like wired up and kind of geared that way. And I really do think that a lot of it is probably from that. You know, Oklahoma means land of the red man. That's where they put them all after the Trail of Tears. So here I am.
Did you say you're a quarter?
Yeah, I'm Chickasaw and Choctaw.
Say that again.
Chickasaw and Choctaw.
Chicken saw,
Chickasaw
Chickasaw,
and Choctaw, yeah.
Choctaw.
Yeah, yeah. So Really thank God for them, and I plan on working with that community a lot.
Yeah,
A lot of options.
that's super cool.
Yeah. So tell me your kind of knowledge. Give me like the elevator pitch for historical trauma and generational trauma for the people out here who don't know.
Well, I got a couple things to say. So I think for me, like those words intergenerational trauma just was so much more intuitive for me. It was like as soon as I heard the words, it's like my body knew something.
Mm,
Um, and with Chinese folks, I'm Chinese. Right? My parents immigrated here, and then I was born here in Canada. So a lot of like bridging the two cultures growing up, and I still still trying to close that gap, right? Because the Chinese culture is very different, and just because it's cultural and common, it doesn't mean it's healthy. And I think a lot of the common rhetoric is that our cultural competency as a therapist is like, oh, we need to be aware. You need to be aware that your clients, your Asian clients, for example, are not going to understand individualism. And it's like, the hell, yeah, no, it depends, right? Like you can't. It's not that black and white. Where, and I've been telling people this example of like a lot of Asian families are very fused, right? Like very enmeshed, and there's limited boundaries between what's mine, what's your space,
mm,
is my space. Your opinion is my opinion. Is can we have the same opinion? Have different opinions, right? And there isn't a lot of space for individualism. It's true.
mm.
But when you start to feel like you're all just like one collective organism, and you lose a sense of yourself.
Yeah.
And I just think it's not the higher way to be um, at all. Like, it doesn't feel nice when you're in a relationship and you don't feel a sense of self, right? With a partner, with a lover, and you know, um, and some people might argue like, oh, family's different, family's blood is thicker than water, they're always going to be there. But let's say, for example, there's sexual abuse in a family, and the victim is being asked to uphold family values of like piety, filial piety, cohesion, and closeness, but they have acknowledged. But let's say if they've gone through the trauma work and they've realized that they've been sexually abused by an uncle, for example, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to then be asked to still hold those family values of,
Ooh.
I gotta respect my elders, right?
Mm.
Mess.
How do you combat? So I've definitely like seen going through college, med school, and then doing a semester or a couple months abroad in like Japan and Hawaii. I saw this happening, and particularly in Indian culture and Pakistani culture. Also, it's like you very have to follow the rules of the culture, and it seems to be very difficult to fight for your individuality because there's so much at stake with the culture. How do you bridge that? How do you find a way to respect the tradition but also go out and create your own?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm an advocate of really being an architect of your own life
Mm,
and blindly following the dominant culture.
right.
So how does this link back to trauma? Like one aspect of trauma of being Chinese, right? The other aspect is like the immigrant aspect of like low socioeconomic status, your parents are super overworked, and
Mm-hmm.
there's like minimal attention in a lot of immigrant Chinese families, like a lot of neglect as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They're just either busy working blue collar jobs or running a business. For my family, it was blue collar work all to this day. Um, and in addition to that, we had to look at politics and the political landscape of like the country that my parents left, right? Which was recently very poverty stricken. China only came to power recently. Um, very education was very oppressed, so there was like a generation of people people that didn't learn how to write in their language, so they relied on scribes to write letters. It was just so chaotic, right? Um, and that had there was war, right? The Japanese invaded and so on, and civil wars and stuff like that. So my parents had their that they never dealt with. And with me being the oldest child, there was just like a lot of extra expectation as an oldest child to be like this like responsible older sister for my younger siblings. And I think that just hadn't happened. I felt like I needed to be needy. I felt like I needed to be completely self-sufficient. And as like a medical professional, a mental health professional, it's just not realistic as a child. A child has a lot of needs from an adult to help them understand their world, help them understand their emotions, and regulate their nervous system. Right. So that's my intergenerational trauma that I have worked through.
First of all, congratulations for getting through that. I know it can present itself in a variety of different ways, because when I think intergenerational trauma, my mind does go to some of, like, the epigenetic changes and those things, but the way that it plays out in the parents' psychology and the culture of it is what truly gets passed down.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, for me, like my father is half Native American, half white, born on a reservation in 1948. So at a time and a place where you didn't want to be a half breed, or whatever they wanted to call him at that time, that's not good. So it was literally my dad against the world. So his demeanor and his attitude reflects that. And being raised by some of those hardened older Native Americans in that day, there was like a strictly like, if you're not tough, you're just going to die. And so that's what I was raised with. Like, if you can't keep up, then, like, that's just the way that is. So it's somewhat emotionally abusive. Like, if you cried, you got spanked. If you laughed too loud, you got told to shut up. If you were sick, I remember you'd be coughing, my dad would be like, "Quiet, quit that coughing." Because back then, there's literally, you just have to survive. That's literally the only goal. You just have to be so badass that no one can touch you. And
Right.
he pulled that off in flying colors, and was able to have 8, 10 children, and started he was able to get through that. But not everybody is that resilient, and a lot of people in that population resultantly had this, like, crazy interrelational issues. Addiction in the Native American population is ridiculous. The suicide rate is crazy. Obesity, which to me is
Right.
trauma exposing itself as a food addiction and coping. They're just trying to calm their nervous system. So what do? You eat.
Yeah.
I see a lot of that. So I guess the way I can tie this back in is, how did you cure yourself? How did you get through those kind of both physiologic, natural, and psychological trials that you had to go through?
Yeah. First of all, I just wanted to honor, the difficulties of having that Indigenous or Native American bloodline and all the traumas that it carries in the cellular level. In BC right now, we're grieving the discovery of this Kamloops residential school. I heard that this has trickled down into international news too, that they
Yeah, I
found,
saw it.
215 children's bodies. So the ugly truth in Canada is that we had these things called residential schools, and literally my Indigenous clients will tell me that the police and like a pastor or some representative from the Catholic Church would show up at their doors and demand to take the children, the Indigenous children or the Native Canadian children. Um, and like, so at these schools, there was sexual abuse, there was physical abuse, there was castration, um, all sorts of neglect and abuse. And it's one of those things that the Canadian government has tried to cover up and hide. But but it keeps on getting, but it's getting revealed, and as it should be. We're
Yeah.
doing that right now collectively as a country, and I just wanted to name that.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, so for me, this was something that was particularly difficult because, I can see the native within my father, but
Right.
when I look in the mirror, for the most part, I'm free of that. I'm a tan white guy.
Right.
But that doesn't take away that 25% of it I carry.
Right.
And I was sort of torn between, I wanted to identify with it, but people were, just like my father, they're not gonna listen to you, right? So whenever we started going through American history, I'm reading about just this massive, just like genocide and onslaught of the savages, of the Native Americans. So then I'm literally identifying with both. As a child, I'm both the person shooting them and the person taking the bullet. So it just like blew up my understanding of like what is going on here.
Yeah.
So it really made me question a lot of humanity, and really made me leave the whole race thing behind and really dive into ideologies.
Mm.
And I do not, so it makes my blood boil to hear those things. But I don't want to get it twisted that any group of people, if given the right power and opportunities, will do that to any other group of people. And I think history has proven that through time, and we have to pay very close attention to the ideologies that lead us that direction of tribalism, of supremacy, and just these tactics to gain control, manipulation. We have to have a very, very low bar threshold for letting those things get to us. First of all, in our personal lives, because cultural change happens at the level of the individual. So if you're allowing that shit to happen in your own life, then you're for sure going to go along with the rest of the Nazis whenever that time comes. So check yourself first, and then make sure to stand up for the society as a whole, because it's a representative of you. And
Right.
So that's why I appreciate you. You've taken more of a social justice stance on fighting for some of the racial things that happened during COVID, and some of the anti-Asian hate, which is something I didn't even really hear that much about. And which was, I thought, kind of wild. Yeah.
Well, I think it was very shocking for Asian Canadians in general, because I think we had ourselves that racism has really been is minimal, right? But then to see that statistic that violence has risen about 700%, it really highlights the fact that, oh, well, we can't really deny, like the quantitative numbers are really telling us that it's still there. It's still there. That was like a huge shock to the nervous system for a lot of people, to recognize that statistic, and then to see all the images in the media of folks that look like their mom or their dad or their grandparents being attacked right on in the streets of San Francisco, in the streets of Vancouver. And then recently we got named as the anti-Asian hate capital of North America. I don't know if you saw Bloomberg.
I didn't know that.
But Vancouver has like a history of racism against Asians, because we have had such a large influx over multiple times in history. So we get blamed and scapegoated for a lot of things. But I could go for like a long time, for a whole other episode.
Yeah, so we'll have to come back in and talk in depth about that, because I do want to hear more about it, but I do want to work on some of the things that can provide real solutions for the people. That would be like addressing trauma. What's your first step?
Yeah, I appreciate you asking this question, because what is the answer to racism is doing your work as a person.
Right.
To deal with the hatred that you have towards yourself, that you may be projecting onto other people.
See, that is powerful. I 100% can agree. I don't even think that, like, racism to me is simply a symptom of an underlying process that is self-hatred being reflected to and put on other people simply because a hammer pulled back has to hit something. So that just becomes the nail.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
I love that.
Simple tribalism, and it's a scapegoat for them to not address what's going on in here.
Exactly.
Yeah, so a lot of people, especially in the South, like they come off like they're tough or whatever for being that way or traditional. I'm like, it's quite the opposite there, buddy. You're about as soft as you can be, and if you were a real, man or woman, then you would stand up for, the individuality and the power that each person has. You wouldn't go hopping on your little soapboxes or bandwagons. It's embarrassing.
Yeah. And the whole world goes through this cultural shift, how to hold our vulnerabilities in a way where we're not projecting it, we're not blaming people, we're really taking ownership and saying, you know what, I'm feeling wrong, or I'm feeling, this is something that I may be bringing into the problem here.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And that takes courage, right? To put yourself into.
I mean, the first step is always awareness. And that's what I tell literally all my patients, all my clients. If we don't even know what's going on, then that's just simply, you're just too dumb to even know you're dumb. So we can't work with that. And the first step is coming to awareness of these things. And, so much of what I do is bringing people to that awareness, to simply just look at stuff and to pay attention to it. It's something I started doing naturally at a young age because I was an observant type. So I grew up in southern Oklahoma where, thank God, my best friend happened to be the one Mexican kid in the whole town, really. So I got some early exposure, but for the most part, like, I got straight passed down. Whatever was on Fox News is what I heard. That's how they related. I have a ton of Middle Eastern friends, Indian friends, Pakistani friends. But back then, the only thing I had heard about people of color of that region was whatever they had to say to justify a war in the Middle East. So it was not good information. It was highly biased and directed towards creating, that initial surge to go to war. So I'm hearing about terrorists and this crazy, groups and this hyper religiosity, and it shifted me as a person. So like, I thought was representative of that, that culture, that person. And then in medical school, I started hanging out with, anytime you're, busting into that demographic, you're going to start seeing a bunch of, first of all, they're highly educated and work super hard. So there's a ton of doctors in that community, from that region or descendants from that region. And like, they're my best friends now. Like, half the people that are listening right now and following are all from over there. I absolutely love them. And it just shattered the understanding I had of, like, wow, I was taught one thing about race, about who these people are, and it just were not true at all. And, I have to own that I have these underlying, biases that were instilled in me by simply what I saw, and reject them and say, I'll have none of that. Love first.
You're alluding to some really good points here. Like, anti-racist work, like gaining self-awareness, taking ownership, what you're bringing into the picture, understanding folks' lived experiences, right? By really immersing yourself, right? Understanding the history and like doing the research and making sure that you are informed, right? Like through good resources, not on TV, whatever you're seeing on social media.
Yeah, so it's a lot harder to get people to open up about that or to admit they're wrong, because the whole ego thing. The thing that I think is most beneficial is it's simple exposure. So being around them, being around other people, other cultures, for me was curative. because eventually, once you hang out with them and you're in close space, you really realize like this dude's doing the same shit that I'm doing. He's got a grandma. I got a grandma. He eats food. We're doing literally all the same stuff, slightly different shades of skin.
That's what one of my idols says. So Dr. Daryl Sewing, he's an American psychologist. Actually, he's an American cultural psychologist, and he says that you just gotta hang out with a variety of folks.
Right. So I mean, that's why like. So here's where it gets kind of. I see this a lot on social media where people of whatever cultures are like, I shouldn't have to represent my culture, my people, or whatever. You should just like we should all just know. And whereas like part of me agrees with that, like like we as humans should truly appreciate, that we're all individuals, sovereign, and have the capacity for change. That is extremely utopian and cute, but it's just not realistic. It's just not. So I got bad news for you. Really, it's good news that really leads to a lot of leadership and ownership, which means that you're going to leave a legacy whether you want to or not. So you had better choose how you want to do that. And for me,
I'm not responsible for educating you about my culture and this and that. But the truth is, like, a lot of these things are written in textbooks. Like, so if it's not passed down through storytelling, how would we ever know?
I don't know. What are we talking about? And I've also noticed this is like people get sensitive where whenever you do ask them, where it's like I would mark off that a lot of like racism. It's not racism. Like they literally just don't know anything about your culture. They have no idea. They're just wonderfully curious and saying things that they think relate to you because they're trying to bond. I've seen people try to get along and it end up being a racial turmoil just because someone was trying to identify and speak like they speak or say they like the things they like, and it goes super south. And I'm just like, God, if that was just done with a little more sophistication, it wouldn't have gone down like that.
Yeah, it's a little bit of people skills, a little bit of doing some, that's important, right? Like, let's not forget, let's not walk in. Like, we'll put it this way: you wouldn't go into an interview without having thoroughly the company that you're trying to apply for, right? Yeah.
Yeah, but the problem is the average person ain't thinking that far ahead. They just, a lot of times just happen to walk into a Waffle House in there with someone else of a different, race, sexual identity or whatever, and then they get into it and just there's not a lot of, I would say, information. At least when I grew up, there was zero like cultural awareness or how to talk to people even.
Did you grow up in North Carolina?
No, I grew up in Oklahoma, and we're like second worst from education in the U.S. as far as states go. So
second worst.
Second worst, yep.
Yeah.
I'm just happy I can read.
Yeah. I'm a doctor at the end of the day.
Right. Yeah. So I guess we can go back to the original question, which was healing trauma. So I think it was like first step awareness. Second step, what do you do about it once you're aware of what's going on?
Yeah, healing trauma. It's a question. How do you heal trauma? I think for me, the most healing thing was my trauma work started out in clinical counseling, obviously, like in my right. I found a lot of healing through the right therapist, the attachment-based therapist that helped me heal a lot of my attachment-based wounds. And she was a white therapist, but she just said all the right things every single session that both evocative but so nurturing. And then I did group work. So it was a specific type of group therapy called therapeutic enactment, which meant that I had to act out and perform a specific trauma for me. I have a specific attachment-based trauma. Like, it just turned out to be an attachment-based type of group, right? But I think sometimes I have to act out other sorts of traumas. And for me, it was like a family trauma of
Mm.
humiliation and feeling really kind of humiliated and bullied in a way by my mom, right? In front of like my primary family members. Um, it just deeply, profoundly impacted me in a way that I can't even put into words, right? Because I didn't even know how much it impacted me until I had to be in this circle of people and act it out and do a portrayal, like kind of like imaginally walk myself through, like, well, how can I correct this situation for myself, right? Or do
Mm.
I need to seek some sort of imaginal sense of how can I create justice in this situation by having certain people in this group play out the different characters in this scene. It's very hard to it's hard to describe, especially in a non-therapist kind of like environment. But I think the best sort of media example is Elton John goes his whole movie. It's set in group therapy. He goes to group therapy and it tells a
Mm.
story of therapy. It's cool.
Mm.
Yeah.
The,
And it hugs his father, and then he and then something like that, right? So it's kind of like that. So it's different people in the group will play your family members.
okay. So it sounds like that was particularly powerful to you
Oh
because it was an experientially
yeah,
based.
yes, it was like profoundly healing. I had grieved so much, and I didn't realize how much pain I had around my mom really, and how much she hurt me. But the thing about counseling is that it was really good at like helping me recognize my anger and my sadness of
Mm.
some of these broken relationships in my home. But it wasn't, I couldn't figure out a way to be at peace with it. I was just in the anger, in the sadness.
Mm. Yeah.
And every time I met with my family, it was like an incredible trigger. Like I just felt like this despicable person, right? And every time I had to go to dinner and see them and stuff, right? It was awful for me still in like my mid 20s.
Mm.
I just felt just um I would say I think what really helped me let go of that was for me was psychedelic.
Okay.
uh, I had found a way to safely do it with trained shamans. She was a psychologist actually who became a shaman.
Mm.
She was a Spanish psychologist who became a shaman. She trained with shamans in South America to do this work, and she had really connected me with. I think initially it was more about like releasing the trauma from the cellular level.
Yep. Getting it out.
Yeah, to get it out, purge it out. Right? And later on, I think a few years later, I came across a different psychedelic, psilocybin, um, and that one, again, it was also like with trained therapists, psychologists who'd later be went into more of
Mm.
the psychedelic spiritual work, right?
Mm.
And it was that had connected with a sense of gratitude that I wasn't able to access before.
Mm. That
Yeah.
was that was the one for me. So I'm gonna hop in right here. Um, Same thing. So whenever I was having one of these experiences in an unprofessional setting compared to what you were going through, what came to my mind was literally just little because I have flashbacks for forever, and for the first time I was having these flashbacks, but strictly from a absolute love, absolute positivity, absolute forgiveness lens. So I was able to view all of my life through this lens, and in that moment I was able to be thankful for the traumas that had happened to me, not just in my life but far back as you could go. I became thankful for suffering and trials and pains because I realized that those things made me who I am. They are the weights that I worked out with that made me so strong. My problem was that I was holding on to the shame, the guilt, the less than, the victim,
Right.
that I can't do it.
That's
As
true.
soon as I realized that these were gifts to me, that
Right.
it's my job to meet them and to conquer them, all
Right.
of a sudden I was extremely empowered. And really from then on out, it was about how do I attack and address this voice inside of me that is identifying with the pain. And, like I said, I said it earlier, the first step is awareness. And whenever I became aware that what I was experiencing was part of the human condition and not abnormal, it's actually the standard. It's suffering is the one thing that we all share. I had this immense sensation of like, oh, we're in this together. For the first time in my entire life, it wasn't me against everybody else. It's we're all the same. That's something I had never experienced because I always felt ostracized. I always felt different. I was always in my head. I didn't think about these things. And then, after I kind of became, together with folks, I was more able to start working on these things from a position of safety, comfort, and love, which was something I had never known. For anybody that's going through trauma, you can't even trust the chair you're sitting in. You can't trust your socks. You can't trust your phone. Everything is something about to go wrong, and that's that state of like, oh shit, is your mode of being, and it's not. It comes from that lack of love, and as soon as you ground yourself in it and you believe in it, all of a sudden now I have that. Now that my roots are down, I am willing to go, out and pursue and to fight and to meet these things. So for me, like a lot of relationship issues, it was a lot of the way that I spoke to myself, which was a straight abusive, very much a bully. Like, do it, you bitch. Like that was like my first thought in the morning. Like, oh, so, like, don't get me wrong, it's powerful. Doing things out of frustration is very powerful, but it doesn't touch doing things out of love.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, I would say, the most crucial switch was going from victim to victor. That is whenever it all shifts, was that state of absolute gratitude for these things, and appreciating that it didn't feel good to go through trauma. It did not feel good to be, bullied, abused, or being a fat kid in the 6th grade. Not cool. Um,
Such
my
an
nickname my nickname was Wiggles, Angela. They
uh,
called me Wiggles, and they slapped my love handles. No, it's funny now. It wasn't funny. It wasn't funny then, but
yeah, no.
um, so yeah. So what role did forgiveness play in your transformation?
Well, it was kind of very simple. Like, I was meditating. I wasn't even specifically meditating on this, but I was just in a state of joy. And I realized that I just would not been able to, if my parents were in Canada, I would not be able to just get a state of joy.
Mm,
You know what I mean, right? Like Canada is like a much more conservative and more not as free and liberal as BC and Canada, right?
mm,
And I just felt it was just for me. I had this sense of knowing that I just would not be having the same. I might not be having this same experience if my parents didn't have the ambition to come here. Um, and I was just very grateful for that in that moment. I remember that moment. And I think over time, very recently, I had realized that I was meditating and I realized that I really like your analogy of the weight. These are the weights that I work out with, the trauma weights that I work out with to become fit and to become healthy. Um, I think I think it's just the way I think of it now is just part of the journey of life to heal and to heal enough so that you can bring that love back home to your
mm, mm.
and to see that your parents are this imperfect other.
Yep.
They're not out to get you specifically. They're not specifically out to get you. Um, they were just in so much of their own pain.
Mm,
And I think is something I've really come to terms more and more recently that I had chosen as a child to be the ultra responsible child out of what I was fed in my environment. And that on me.
So this kind of bridges us into my next question, or kind of concept was, forgiveness of others was so powerful, for me in my transformation and letting go of some of those traumas. But the greatest one was forgiveness of self, because, those things had happened to me, but who was the one who decided to identify with that, that pain, that suffering? Who was the one that decided to live that out in my everyday life through frustration? Who was the one who talked to myself with that negative voice in my mind saying, you can't do things, you won't do things? Those are all mine. And I'm a huge leadership guy. I'm a huge own your existence, own your voice person. And I very quickly realized that, that was on me, like truly, like that's my bad. And then even worse than like trauma's bad, but then like realizing that you traumatized other people because you didn't manage your trauma, now that shit's traumatizing. And I realized how abusive I was to, siblings, mother, father, other kids at school, like bullying, just treating other people like I treated myself, which was bad. So much of it was like forgiving myself and reminding myself that, hey, Benjamin, you're a human being. At that time, you were an uneducated, aggressive chimpanzee, and you were just taking on and doing the best that you absolutely could. And dude, just thank God that your dad and your mother are stronger than you are, because, your bitch ass probably would have died going through what they went through. And, secondly, just appreciate myself and be grateful to myself and let go of those feelings of negativity and just say, look, man, this is something that you did when you didn't know any better. You're different now. You're literally different now. You're thinking different and you're behaving differently. You do not have to identify with who you were 10 seconds ago, let alone 10 years ago when you were an idiot. So step into the new you, y'all.
Yeah. I feel that we could probably go into a whole other episode, healing from trauma, because there's a lot more that I think you and I have in the audience of like the work of healing from trauma. It's like it can be really simple actually, but then it's also really complex and there's always a layer.
No, there's layers to it. Trauma.
Yeah. But
Well, it's part of our nervous system, right? It's like it's pleasure and pain are how we're oriented in space and time. And pain and trauma, that's going to set up the foundation for how we work through life. And one of the reasons I wanted to come on this show with you, or this interview, was to destigmatize it. And generational trauma, racial trauma,
totally.
all these things. I want people to understand that how we view and deal with our pain and suffering it quite literally sets the foundation for the rest of your life and society. And if y'all don't own it, it's going to be ugly.
Totally. If we don't own our own stuff, it's going to be a really ugly society. Well, it really comes back to the collective. Benjamin, I really want to stay, but I think we have to schedule another one.
Now, I appreciate you coming on. By all means, I know you got to go. You're busy. Give yourself a quick shout out. How do people find you, follow you, and hear more what you do?
So people can follow me at Angela Leong. That's my account where I talk about therapy. My business account is Elegant Mind, so that's where my practice is. That's my practice. I also have a grassroots organization where we're raising funds for Asians with low SES to access mental health counseling. It's follow that account at Movement for Asian Lives. So,
yeah, that's beautiful stuff. Absolutely. So have a good rest of your day. Okay, and we'll catch up again soon.
We'll catch
Bye.
you. Bye.